Balthasar's Odyssey by Amin Malouf. Notebook 2. The Voice of Sabbatai. The Harbor, Sunday, 29 November 1665. There were still quite a lot of empty pages left in my other notebook, but I am now beginning another that I have just bought in the harbor. I don't have the other one anymore, and I think if I didn't get it back again, after all I've set down in it since August, I'd lose the inclination to write at all, and with it something of my will to live. But it isn't lost. I simply had to leave it behind when I left Barinelli's house in a hurry this morning. I hope to have it back by tonight, God willing. Hatim has gone to fetch it and a few other things, and I trust him to manage. Meanwhile, I will deal with the events of this long day and the setbacks it has inflicted on me. Some of them I expected, others not. This morning, then, while I was getting ready to go to church in Pera with all my people, a Turkish official arrived in state. He didn't dismount from his horse, but sent one of his entourage to find me. All the local people saluted him very deferentially, some doffing their hats, then they vanished down the nearest alley. When I presented myself, he greeted me in Arabic from amid his elaborate trappings. He spoke as if we'd known one another for years and called me his friend and brother, but his knitted brows told quite a different tale. He invited me to honor him with a visit sometime, and I politely answered that the honor would be mine, wondering all the time who he was and what he wanted of me. Then he pointed to one of his men and said he'd send him to escort me to see him next Thursday. I was suspicious after all that's happened to me lately and had no wish to go to the house of a stranger. So I replied that unfortunately I had to leave the city on urgent business before Thursday, but that I gladly accepted his generous invitation for the next time I was in this delightful capital. Not if I can help it, I thought. Then he suddenly took from his pocket the document my jailer had got me to sign by trickery and under duress. He unfolded it, pretending his name was on it, and claiming to be surprised that I should think of leaving Constantinople without discharging my debt. He must be the judge's brother, thought I, but he could be any powerful person in league with my jailer, and the latter could have meant to pass my IOU to him all along. The alleged judge was probably a mere invention. "Oh, you must be the Ghadi's brother," I said to give myself time to think and indicate to everyone else that I didn't really know who he was. His tone grew curt now. "Never mind whose brother I am. I am certainly not the brother of a dog from Genoa. When are you going to pay me what you owe me?" The time for pleasantries was clearly past. "May I see the document?" "You know very well what's in it," he replied, feigning impatience, but he held it out towards me, and I moved closer to read it. "The money's not due for another 5 days," I said. "Thursday. Next Thursday, and be sure you bring me the whole amount, not an asper less. And if you try to slip away before then, I'll see to it that you spend the rest of your days in prison. My people will watch you day and night from now on. Where are you going?" "It's Sunday. I was going to church." "That's right. Go to church. Pray for your life. Pray for your soul. And hurry up and find a good money lender." He ordered 2 of his men to stand guard at the door of the house and went off with the rest of his entourage, his leave-taking much less ceremonious than his arrival. "What are we going to do now?" Martha asked. It didn't take me long to reply. What we were going to do anyway, go to church. I don't often pray when I'm in church. I go there to be soothed by the singing, the incense, the pictures, the statues, the vaults, and the stained glass windows. I like to lose myself in meditation, reveries, daydreams that have nothing to do with religion and are sometimes even rather daring. I gave up praying, as I remember very well, when I was 13. I lost my arjo when I stopped believing in miracles. I had to explain how that happened, and I shall do, but later. Too many worrying things happened today. I'm not in the mood for long digressions. I just wanted to say that this morning I did pray. I prayed for a miracle, and I expected my prayer to be answered. I even, God forbid, felt I deserved it. I have always been an honest merchant and also a decent man. I have often given a helping hand to poor people whom the Almighty Himself had abandoned. God forgive me again. I have never taken advantage of the weak or humiliated anybody who's dependent upon me. So why should He let anyone persecute me, ruin me, threaten my liberty and my life? So, standing there in the church at Pera, I wasn't ashamed to gaze at the image of the Creator above the altar, radiating beams of gold like the Zeus of the ancients, and ask Him for a miracle. As I write this, I don't yet know if my prayer has been answered. I shan't know until tomorrow, until dawn tomorrow. But it seems to me there has been a preliminary sign. I listened with only half an ear to Father Thomas's sermon. It was on the subject of Advent and the sacrifices we ought to make to thank God for having sent us the Messiah. I started paying attention towards the end when the preacher asked his congregation to pray for those among them who were due to go to sea tomorrow, that they might be granted fair winds and a safe voyage. At this, eyes turned towards a gentleman in the front row holding a captain's hat under his arm, who bowed in acknowledgment of the priest's recommendation. Suddenly, I was struck by a solution to my dilemma. We should leave straight away without returning to Barinelli's house, go straight to the ship, spend the night on board, and put some distance between us and our pursuers as fast as possible. What times we live in when an innocent man's only resource is flight. But Hatim's right. If I make the mistake of appealing to the authorities, I risk losing both my money and my life. These rascals seem so sure of themselves. They must have accomplices among the powers that be, and I am just a foreigner, an infidel, a dog from Genoa. I'll never get any justice trying to fight against them. That would only endanger the lives of my nearest and dearest as well as my own. On leaving the church, I went to see the captain, whose name is Beauvoisin, and I asked him if by chance he intended to put in at Smyrna. To tell the truth, in the state I had been in since that interview with my persecutor this morning, I was ready to go anywhere. But I might have scared the captain off if I'd let him suspect I was a runaway. I was glad to learn that the ship was indeed due to call in at Smyrna to take on cargo and to put ashore Master Rob Loy, the French merchant who'd been acting as temporary ambassador and whom I'd met with Father Thomas. We agreed on a price to cover both transport and board, 10 French écus, the equivalent of 350 medines, payable half on embarkation and the other half on arrival. The captain emphasized that we mustn't be late coming on board. He meant to sail at daybreak. I suggested that to make sure of being on time, we should embark this evening. And so we did. First, I sold the mules we had left and sent Hatim to Barinelli's to explain our hasty departure and collect my notebook and a few other things. Then Marta and my nephews and I went on board. That's where we are now. Hatim isn't back yet, but I expect him at any minute. He intended to enter the inn through a back door so as to elude our persecutors. I know he'll manage, but I can't help being anxious. All I've had to eat is a piece of bread and some dates and dried fruit. They say that's the best way to prevent seasickness. But it's not seasickness I am worried about at the moment. It was probably best to board the ship right away without going back to Barinelli's place, but I can't help thinking somebody might have started looking for us. And if they have contacts everywhere and it occurs to them to search the port, we might be arrested. Perhaps I should have told the captain why I was in such a hurry, so that he wouldn't spread it aboard that we were on his ship, and would know what to say if any dubious person came looking for us. But I didn't like to tell him all my misfortunes in case he changed his mind about taking us. It's going to be a long night. Until we get safely out of the port tomorrow morning, I'll jump out of my skin at the slightest sound. Lord, how did I sink from being an honest and respectable merchant to being an outlaw without doing anything wrong? Talking of which, when I was introducing myself to Captain Beauvoisin outside the church, I heard myself saying I was traveling with my clerk, my nephews, and my wife. Yes, despite the fact that I decided to put an end to such duplicity when I got to Constantinople, there I was on the eve of my departure putting the same false coin back into circulation. And so thoughtlessly, too. My fellow passengers on the ship won't be like the anonymous members of the Aleppo caravan. They'll include gentlemen who know my name and with whom I might have had to deal in the future. The captain may already have told Father Thomas he's agreed to take me and my wife as passengers. I can just see the priest's face. He wouldn't say anything because of the secrecy of the confessional, but I can guess what he'd think. What on earth makes me behave like that? Simple souls say love makes people act irrationally. No doubt that's true, but there are other things involved beside love. There's the approach of the fateful year, the feeling that our actions will have no consequences, that causes are no longer followed by effects, that crime won't necessarily be punished, that good and evil, what is acceptable and what is unacceptable, will soon all be merged together in the same deluge, and hunters die at the same time as their prey. But it's time I shut my notebook. It's the waiting, the anxiety that have made me write like this tonight. Perhaps I'll write quite differently tomorrow. Monday, 30 November 1665. If I thought the dawn would bring me salvation, I've been very disappointed, and it's difficult to hide my anxiety from my companions. We've been hanging about the whole day, and I find it hard to explain why I remain on board when all the other passengers and the crew take advantage of the delay to go ashore and browse around the market. The only excuse I could think of is that I've spent more than I expected to in Constantinople and find myself short of money. So I don't want to give my nephews and my wife the chance to make me spend still more. The reason for the delay is that during the night the captain heard that Monsieur de la Haye, the French ambassador, had at last arrived in Constantinople to take up his duties 5 years after he was appointed to succeed his father. It's an important event for all the French people here. They hope it will restore better relations between the French crown and the Grand Vizier. There's talk of renewing the capitulation signed last century between Francois I and Suleiman the Great. Captain Beauvoisin and Master Robloy wanted to go to welcome the ambassador and pay him their respects. This evening I gathered that because of certain complications the ambassador hasn't yet gone ashore. Negotiations with the Ottoman authorities haven't been completed, and his ship, Le Grand César, is at the anchor at the entrance to the harbor. So it looks as if we shan't leave until tomorrow evening at the earliest, perhaps not until the day after tomorrow. Meanwhile, mightn't it occur to our enemies to come and look for us in the port? But with luck they'll think we're going back to Gibelet overland and more likely to be found in the direction of Scutari or on the road to Izmit. It's also possible that the scoundrels were just bluffing all along to scare me into paying up, and that they are as anxious as I am to avoid the repercussions of an incident in the port. As foreigners, their victims could count on protection from their ambassadors and consuls. Hatim is back safe and sound but empty-handed. He couldn't get into Barinelli's place. The house was under surveillance, back and front. He did manage to send a message to our host, though, asking him to hold on to our things until we could reclaim them. It upsets me to be parted from my notebook and think vulgar eyes might be gloating over my secrets. Does the disguise I use really protect them? But it's no good thinking about it all the time, getting worked up and wondering if I ought to have acted differently. Better to trust in Providence, my lucky star, and above all, Barinelli. I am very fond of him, and I am sure he wouldn't do anything unseemly. At sea, 1 December 1665. I awoke to a delightful surprise. We were no longer in port. I'd spent the night feeling queasy and unable to sleep. I didn't close my eyes till just before dawn, but when I opened them, it was the middle of the morning and we were sailing across the Sea of Marmara. We'd left unexpectedly because instead of coming with us, Master Raboli had decided to spend some time with the ambassadors to bring him up to date on his own stewardship. So Captain Beauvoisin, who'd planned to go and see Monsieur de la Haye only to keep Master Raboli company, saw no reason for further delay. As soon as I realized we were underway, my seasickness abated, though usually the further you are from shore, the worse it gets. I gathered that if the winds are favorable and the sea remains calm, we'll reach Smyrna in less than a week. But it's December, so it won't be surprising if we encounter a bit of rough weather. Now that I am feeling more peaceful, I'll keep my promise and tell the story of how I lost interest in religion and in particular stopped believing in miracles. As I said before, I was 13 when it happened. Until then, I was always to be found on my knees with a rosary in my hand and surrounded by women in black. I knew the virtues of all the saints by heart. I had been more than once to the chapel at Ephraim, a modest cell hewn out of the rock, once inhabited by a pious anchorite still revered in the region around Gibelet for the many wonders he performed. So one day, when I was about 13 and had just returned home after one such pilgrimage, a litany of miracles is still ringing in my ears, and I couldn't help telling my father about the paralytic who'd been able to walk back unaided down the mountainside, and the mad woman from the village of Ibrin, whose reason was restored the moment she rested her forehead against the chill stone wall of the shrine. I used to be very upset by my father's indifference to things concerning the faith, especially after a devout lady from Gibelet hinted that my mother's early death, I was only 4 at the time, and she herself scarcely 20, was due to her not having been prayed over properly. I held this against my father and wanted to bring him back to the straight and narrow. He listened to my edifying anecdotes without showing either skepticism or astonishment. He just kept nodding impassively. When I'd finished, he stood up, tapped me on the shoulder to tell me to wait, then brought from his bedroom a book I'd often seen him reading. Laying it down on the table close to the lamp, he began to read out in Greek a number of stories about miraculous cures. He didn't say which saint had performed them. He wanted me to guess. I liked this idea. I consider myself quite capable of identifying a miracle worker's style. Was it Saint Arsenius, or Bartholomew, or Simeon Stylites, or Prosperina perhaps? The most fascinating story, it elicited great ecstasies from me, told of a man whose lung was pierced by an arrow that remained lodged there. He slept for a night in the saint's room and dreamed the holy man had touched him. When he awoke, he was cured, and the head of the arrow that had wounded him was clutched in his own right hand. The arrow made me think the saint in question might be Sebastian. No, not him, said my father. I wanted to go on guessing, but my father demurred and told me flatly that the person who had performed the miraculous cures was Asclepius. Yes, Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, in his shrine at Epidaurus, where countless pilgrims have gone for centuries. The book containing these stories was the famous description of Greece, written by Pausanias in the 2nd century A.D. When my father told me all this, I was shattered to the depths of my piety. It was all lies then? I don't know. Perhaps. but people believed in it enough to go to the temple of Asclepius year after year to be cured. But false gods can't perform miracles. I suppose not. You're probably right. Do you believe it's true? I haven't the slightest idea. And he went and put the book back on its shelf. From that day on, I have made no more pilgrimages to the chapel at Ephraim, nor have I prayed very often. Though I haven't actually become an unbeliever, I now take the same view as my father of all praying and kneeling and prostration. A view that's skeptical, distant, neither respectful nor contemptuous, sometimes intrigued but always free of any certainty. And I like to think that out of all his creatures, the ones the Creator likes best are those who have managed to be free. Doesn't a father like to see his sons grow out of infancy into manhood, even if their young claws wound a little? And why should God be a less benevolent father than the rest? At sea, Wednesday, 2 December. We have passed the Dardanelles and are heading due south. The sea is calm, and I often stroll on the deck with Martha on my arm. She looks like a lady from France, and the crew eye her surreptitiously, just obviously enough for me to realize how much they envy me, but at the same time most respectfully, so I manage to be proud without being jealous. Day after day, almost imperceptibly, I've got used to her presence, so much so that I hardly ever call her the widow now. It is as if the word were no longer good enough, though in fact the reason we are on our way to Smyrna is to get proof of her widowhood. She's sure she'll get it. I am more skeptical. I am afraid we might fall among venal officials again who'll try to drain us piastra by piastra of all the money we've got left. If that happens, we'd do best to take Hatim's advice and get a false death certificate. I still don't care for the idea, but we may be reduced to it if all the honest solutions fail. But come what may, I won't abandon the woman I love and go back to Gibelet without her. And plainly we can't go back there together without a document, genuine or otherwise, that will let us live under the same roof. Perhaps I haven't yet made it quite clear that I am deeper in love now than I ever was in my youth. I don't want to open old wounds. They are deep and still unhealed despite the passage of time. I just want to explain that my first marriage was a marriage of reason, while the marriage I envisage with Marta is one of passion. A marriage of reason at 19 and a marriage of passion at 40. Well, that's how my life will have been. I don't complain. I have too much reverence for the person I'd have to complain of, and I can't blame him for wanting me to marry a Genoese wife. It's because my forebears always married Genoese wives that they managed to preserve their own language and customs, and remained attached to their original country. As far as all that is concerned, my father was in the right, and anyhow I wouldn't have opposed him for anything. It was just unfortunate that the girl who came our way was Elvira. She was the daughter of a Genoese merchant from Cyprus. She was 16, and both her father and mine believed she was fated to be my wife. I was about the only young Genoese in our part of the world, and our marriage seemed to be in the order of things. But Elvira had promised herself to a young man from Cyprus, a Greek whom she loved to distraction. Her parents wanted to separate them at all costs. So from the first she saw me as a persecutor, or at least an accomplice of her persecutors, whereas in fact I was as much forced into the marriage as she was. I was more docile, though, and more naive, curious to find out about what everyone said were the most wondrous of pleasures, amused by the rituals involved, and as obedient to my father and his commands as she was to hers. Too proud to submit, too smitten with the other youth to listen to or look at or smile at me, Elvira was a sad episode in my life, cut short only by her early death. I don't like to say it came as a relief. Nothing concerning her makes me think of relief or serenity or peace. The whole misadventure left me with nothing but a lasting prejudice against marriage and its ceremonies, and against women too. I've been a widower since I was 20 and was resigned to remaining one. If I'd been more inclined to prayer, I might have gone to live in a monastery. Only the circumstances of this journey have made me question my deep rooted doubts. I may be able to go through the same motions as believers, but in that area too, I remain a doubter. I find it very painful to rake over that old story. Whenever I think of it, I start to suffer again. Time has hardly healed the wound at all. Sunday, 6 December. 3 days of storm, fog, creaking timbers, driving rain, nausea, and dizziness. My legs will scarcely carry me. I try to hang on to wooden walls, passing ghosts. I trip over a bucket. Two unknown arms help me up. I immediately fall down again on the same spot. Why didn't I stay at home in my nice, quiet shop, peacefully writing out columns of figures in my ledger? What madness made me set out on my travels? Above all, what possessed me to go to sea? It wasn't by eating forbidden fruit that man annoyed the Creator. It was by going to sea. How presumptuous it is to risk life and property on this seething immensity, to try to mark out paths over the abyss, grazing with our oars the backs of buried monsters like Behemoth, Rahab, Leviathan, and Abaddon, serpents, beasts, dragons. That's where the insatiable pride of man lies, the sin he commits over and over again in the face of repeated punishments. One day, says the Apocalypse, long after the end of the world, when evil is at last overcome, the sea will no longer be liquid. Instead, it will be like a glass, a surface that can be walked over dry shod. No more storms, no more drownings, no more seasickness. Just one vast blue crystal. Meanwhile, the sea is still the sea. This Sunday morning, there isn't a moment's respite. I put on clean clothes and have been able to write these few lines, but the sun is going dark again. Time has ceased to exist, and the passengers and crew of our fine carrack are hurrying about in all directions. Yesterday, when the storm was at its height, Martha came and clung to me, her head on my chest and her lips against mine. Fear had become an accomplice, a friend, and the fog a tolerant innkeeper. We held one another, desired one another. Our lips met, and people roamed around us without seeing us. Tuesday, the 8th. After Sunday's brief lull, we are in the midst of bad weather again. I don't know that bad weather really describes it. It's all so strange. The captain tells me he's never seen anything like it in 26 years' experience all over the world. Certainly not in the Aegean, anyhow. A kind of sticky fog lowering over everything, unmoved by the wind. The air is dense, heavy, ashen. The ship is buffeted about all the time but doesn't make any progress, as if it were impaled on a fork. I suddenly feel I am nowhere and going nowhere. All the people around me keep crossing themselves and muttering. I shouldn't be frightened, but I am, like a child alone at night in a wooden house when the last candle goes out and the floorboards start to creak. I look around for Marta. She's sitting with her back to the sea, waiting for me to finish writing. I can't wait to put my desk away and go over and hold her hand and go on holding it as I did that night in the tailor's village where we slept in the same bed. She was a foreign element, an intruder in my journey then, and now she's its compass. Love is always an intrusion, and by it chance is made flesh, passion becomes reason. The fog is getting denser, my head is throbbing. Wednesday the 9th. Darkness at noon, but the sea has stopped tossing us about. The ship is quiet, people have given up shouting at one another, and when they do speak, it's in hushed voices, apprehensively, as if in the presence of royalty. Some albatrosses are flying overhead, and other birds with black plumage that I don't know the name of is screeching horribly. I found Marta weeping. She didn't want to tell me why, and said it was just because of the fatigues and concerns of the journey. When I pressed her, she eventually confessed. Ever since we put to sea, I've had the feeling we'll never reach Smyrna. Was it premonition or just the effect of her anxiety and all her previous misfortunes? At any rate, I clapped my hand over her mouth to stop her words flying up to heaven. I begged her never to speak like that again on board ship. I should never have forced her to speak at all, but Lord, how was I to know she set so little store by superstition? I don't know if I should admire her for it or be frightened. Hatim and Habib keep whispering together, sometimes laughing and sometimes serious, but they stop whenever I come near. As for Boumé, he walks back and forth on the deck from morning till night, deep in unfathomable meditations. Silent, absorbed, wearing that distant smile that isn't a smile at all. The down on his cheeks is as light as ever, though his younger brother has been shaving for 3 years. Perhaps he ought to be more interested in women, but he doesn't really take an interest in anything, whether men or horses or finery. The only thing he knows is books. The only skin he admires is parchment. Several times he's walked past me without even seeing me. But this evening he came and asked me a riddle. Do you know the names of the 7 churches in the Apocalypse? I've read about them. Let's see. There's Ephesus and Philadelphia and Pergamos, I think, and Sardis and Thyatira. That's it. Thyatira. That's the one I'd forgotten. Wait, that's only 5 of them. But my nephew went on, as if reciting to himself. I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Jesus Christ, was in the isle that is called Patmos, for the word of God and for the testimony of Jesus Christ. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet saying, What thou seest, write in a book and send it on to the 7 churches which are in Asia, on to Ephesus, and on to Smyrna, and on to Pergamos, and on to Thyatira, and on to Sardis, and on to Philadelphia, and on to Laodicea. God, why had I forgotten Smyrna? Friday the 11th. Marta's presentiment was wrong. We have arrived in Smyrna. Now I am on terra firma again, and I can write it down without my hand trembling. I felt the same as she did throughout the crossing. It was more than a feeling, though. It was a horrible conviction. It caused me physical pangs, though I did my best to hide them from the others. I really did feel this was my last voyage, and so it may be after all, even if it won't have ended before we get to Smyrna. The only question I asked myself was how the end would come. At first, when the storm began, I was sure we were going to be shipwrecked. Then, as the sea and the sky grew calmer, but at the same time darker, my fears became more ambiguous and less admissible. My fears were no longer those that afflict all who go to sea. I didn't scan the horizon for pirates or storms or fabled monsters. I wasn't worried about fire or epidemics or treacherous currents or falling overboard. There wasn't any horizon. There wasn't any deck to fall from. Only the endless gloom, the clinging fog, the low apocalyptic cloud. I am sure all my fellow passengers felt the same. I could tell from the look on their faces like people suddenly and inexplicably condemned to death, and from the way they muttered to themselves, not to mention the haste with which they eventually disembarked. We are now ashore in Smyrna, thank God. Admittedly, it's still dark, but that's because it's nearly nightfall. The sky started to clear as soon as we entered the bay. Tomorrow we shall see the sun. Smyrna, Saturday, 12 December, 1665. We slept in the Capuchin monastery and I dreamed about being shipwrecked. All the time I was at sea, I was afraid during the day, but at night I dreamed I was on dry land in my house in Gibelet. The monks received us politely but without enthusiasm, even though I told them, rather improperly, it's true, that I'd been recommended to them by Father Thomas of Paris. If I had asked him for a letter of introduction, I am sure he'd have obliged, but things happened so fast. I didn't know I'd be leaving so soon, and I didn't want my pursuers in Constantinople to go to the church and learn from him where I'd gone to. I suppose I could have asked him not to tell them anything, but then I'd have to explain why I was being pursued and to ask him to lie to protect me. To cut a long story short, I came without a recommendation but acted as if I had one. I even referred to Father Thomas as my confessor, which was not actually untrue but slightly inaccurate and rather boastful. But that's not really what I meant to talk about today. I just wanted to write up my notes in chronological order, starting with last night and my dream, before getting on to my main preoccupation, the strange things that everyone tells me are taking place here in Smyrna. I have many different sources of information. The first is an elderly Capuchin monk, Father Jean-Baptiste of Douai, who has lived in the Levant for 20 years. Before that, he spent 15 years in Genoa, which he misses and loves as if it were his birthplace. He says it's an honor for him to talk to a descendant of a famous Embriachi, and he opens his heart to me as if he'd known me from childhood. But I have also heard evidence about what's going on from other foreigners whom I've met today, as well as from some of the local people. They all say that a man living here in Smyrna, a Jew called Sabbatai, or Shabbatai, has proclaimed that he is the Messiah and predicted that the world will end in 1666. In June of that year, I believe, to be precise. The strangest thing about it is that most of the people in Smyrna, even the Christians and the Turks, and even those who make fun of the man himself, seem to believe his prophecy will come true. Father Jean-Baptiste himself maintains that the appearance of false messiahs is a sign that the end of the world is at hand. People say the Jews are no longer willing to work and spend all day in prayer and ritual fasting. Their shops are shut and travelers are unable to find a money changer. I haven't been able to check that this is true because yesterday evening and today have been the Jewish Sabbath. But I'll be able to do so tomorrow, which is the Lord's day for us, but not for the Jews and the Turks. I shall go to the Jewish quarter, which is on the hillside near the old castle. The foreigners here, mostly English and Dutch, live by the sea, on either side of the avenue skirting the harbor. Then I'll see with my own eyes whether what people tell me is true. 13 December 1665. The Jews say it's a wonder, and I, who have always lived in Ottoman territory, agree with them. Their so-called Messiah is safe and sound. I have seen him with my own eyes, walking freely through the streets and singing at the top of his voice. And yet this morning everyone had given him up for dead. He'd been summoned to appear before the Ghadi, the judge who rules the roost in Smyrna and who deals extremely harshly with anyone who is a threat to law and order. And in the eyes of the authorities, what is going on now in Smyrna is more than a threat. It's an extraordinary challenge, an insult. No one is working. It's not only the Jews. In a city that has almost as many foreign merchants as there are anywhere, nothing is being bought or sold. The dockers in the harbor won't load or unload cargoes, stalls and workshops are shut up, and the people just gather in the squares talking about the end of the world and the destruction of empires. It's reported that delegations are beginning to arrive from faraway countries to prostrate themselves before this Sabbatai, whose supporters call him not only the Messiah, but also the King of Kings. I say his supporters and not the Jews because the latter are very divided in their opinions about him. Most of them believe he is the anointed, one heralded by the prophets, but some of the rabbis see him as an impostor, a blasphemer, because he dares to utter the name of God, a thing that is prohibited among the Jews. But his supporters say nothing may be forbidden to the Messiah, and that this breaking of the rules is a sure sign that Sabbatai is not just an ordinary believer. The battles between the two factions apparently went on for months without anything becoming known of the matter outside the contenders' own community. Then a few days ago, the controversy took a new turn. Various incidents took place in the streets, and some Jews accused other Jews of being infidels in front of a crowd of mystified Christians and Turks. And yesterday something serious happened at prayer time in a large meeting place known as the Portuguese synagogue. It was full of Sabbatai's enemies who did not want him to be admitted. But he arrived surrounded by his supporters and proceeded to hack down the door with an axe. It was because of this that the Ghadi decided to send for him, as I learned early this morning from Father Jean-Baptiste, who takes a close interest in all this. It was he who encouraged me to go to the Ghadi's house to watch Sabbatai's arrival and tell him all about it. I needed no persuading. I have grown more and more curious about this affair every day and consider it a privilege to witness such portentous events. A privilege, and also, why should I go on being afraid of the word? A sign. Yes, a sign. What else can I call what's happening? I left Gibelet because of all the rumors about the year of the beast, and was overtaken on the way by a woman whom people were always talking to about Smyrna, because it was there that her husband was supposed to have been seen for the last time. For love of her, I find myself in that very town, and now I discover that it's precisely here and now that the end of the world is announced. We are only a few days away from 1666, and I am in the process of losing my doubt in the same way as other people lose their faith. Just because of the false Messiah? Someone may ask. No, because of what I have seen today and what my reason can no longer comprehend. The Ghadi's residence can hardly be compared to the palaces in Constantinople, but it's by far the most imposing house in Smyrna. 3 stories of delicate arcades, a gate that visitors must stoop to pass through, and a huge garden where the horses of the guards browse. For the Ghadi is the government as well as a judge. And if the Sultan is God's shadow on earth, then the Ghadi is the Sultan's shadow in the city. It is his job to make the Sultan's subjects live in fear, whether they are Turks, Armenians, Jews, or Greeks, or even strangers. Not a week goes by that someone isn't tortured, hanged, impaled, or beheaded, or if the person concerned is of high rank and the port has so decided, respectfully strangled. So people never hang around too close to the Ghadi's residence. Even this morning, though there was a crowd of onlookers thereabouts, they were scattered through the alleys, ready to disperse at the first sign of trouble. Among them were many Jews in red caps whispering feverishly together, and also numbers of foreign merchants there, like me, to see what happened. Suddenly a shout went up. "There he is!" said Hatim, pointing to a man with a red beard, wearing a long coat and a headdress set with precious stones. He was accompanied by a dozen or so of his entourage. About 100 more followed at a distance. He walked slowly but steadily, as becomes a dignitary, then suddenly started to sing loudly, waving his hands as though haranguing the crowd. Some of his followers went through the motions of singing too, but this was the only choice that could be heard. Around us, other Jews were smiling with approval, looking askance at a small group of Janissaries who were mounting guard. Sabbatai walked right past them without so much as a glance and still singing regardless. I was sure they'd grab him and beat him up, but all they did was smile broadly as if to say, "We'll soon see what song you sing when the Ghadi delivers his sentence." We had a long wait before he emerged again. Meanwhile, many of the Jews prayed, swaying from side to side. Some were already weeping. As for the European merchants, some of them looked worried, others mocking or contemptuous according to their nature. There were varying attitudes even in our small group. Boumé was radiant, proud to see events confirming his forecast about next year, as if his perspicacity will win him special treatment when the end of the world came. His brother, meanwhile, had forgotten all about the false Messiah and the apocalypse and was busy ogling a young Jewess leaning nonchalantly against a wall nearby to fasten her shoe. From time to time, she glanced at my nephew, covering the lower part of her face to hide a smile. Standing in front of her was a man who might have been her husband or her father. He turned round now and then as if he suspected something, but he saw nothing. Only Hatim and I were watching the romantic maneuvers, the kind that each of the parties concerned knows will come to nothing, though it seems the human heart then feeds off its own desires and may even grow empty again once they are satisfied. As for Marta, she felt sorry for the man about to be sentenced to death. Then she leaned towards me and asked if it wasn't before this same judge in this same house that her husband was brought a few years ago, before he was hanged. "God have mercy on him," she whispered. She ought to, like me, to have been thinking, "Let's hope we can get proof of it." Then up went another shout. The condemned man had emerged. But he hadn't been condemned at all. He was free and attended by all his followers, and when those who'd been waiting for him saw him smiling and waving to them, they started shouting, "The law of the Most High has shown forth its power." Sabbatai replied with something similar, then started singing as before. This time many other voices were loud enough to be heard, though not loud enough to drown his. He sang himself hoarse and his face was red. The Janissaries on sentry duty didn't know what to do. In normal circumstances, they'd already have drawn their sabers ready to intervene, but the judge had let this man go free. They themselves would be guilty of disobedience if they arrested him. So they decided not to do anything, and on an order from their officer went in and took refuge in the palace garden. Their withdrawal had an instant effect on the crowd, who started calling out, "Long live King Sabbatai," in Hebrew and Spanish. Then they formed a procession and set out for the Jewish quarter, singing louder and louder as they went. Ever since then, the whole town has been in a state of ferment. A wonder, did I say? What else can I call it? In this country, people have had their heads cut off for crimes 30 times less serious than what I saw today. Until nightfall, processions went through the town in all directions, calling citizens of all religions to rejoice, to repent, or to fast, hailing the advent of a new age, the age of the resurrection. They call next year not the year of the beast, but the year of the Jubilee. Why? I don't know. But what does seem evident is that they're glad to see the end of an age that brought them, they say, nothing but humiliation, persecution, and suffering. But what will the future bring? What will the world be like after the end of the world? Shall we have to die in some cataclysm in order to make way for the resurrection? Or will it just be the beginning of a new era, a new kingdom, the kingdom of God restored on earth? After all, human governments have shown through the ages how unjust and corrupt they are. This evening, everyone in Smyrna feels that this kingdom is at hand, and that all the others, including that of the Sultan, will be swept away. Is that why the Ghadi let Sabbatai go free? Was he trying to manipulate the ruler of tomorrow, as the powers that be do so often when they sense that the wind is changing? Today an English merchant told me with a knowing look that the Jews had paid the judge a large sum of money to let their king go safe and sound. I find that hard to believe. If the Sublime Porte heard such a thing had happened today in Smyrna, it's the Ghadi's own head that would fall. No sensible man would take such a risk. So should I believe what I was told by a Jewish merchant newly arrived from Ankara? He said that in Sabatai's presence the Turkish judge, having at first greeted the accused without rising and spoken to him contemptuously, was suddenly dazzled by a mysterious light and started to tremble with awe. He saw the Jew to the door with great deference, begging forgiveness for his previous behavior. But I find that hard to believe. I am confused, and none of the accounts I hear is satisfactory. Perhaps I'll see things more clearly tomorrow. Monday, 14 December 1665. Today I'm still tempted to talk of wonders, but I don't want to debase the word by using it in its popular sense. I'd rather speak of something unexpected, amazing, a happy coincidence. I've just met in a street in Smyrna the man I most longed to talk to. I didn't get much sleep last night. I'm extremely disturbed by what's happening and keep tossing and turning in my mind as well as in my bed, wondering what to believe, who to believe, and how to prepare myself for the upheavals that are imminent. I remember writing before I set out that I was afraid I was losing my mind. How the devil could it be otherwise? Yet I keep trying to unravel the mystery as serenely as I can, but I can't go on shutting myself up night and day in the citadel of my reason, with my eyes shut and my hands over my ears, telling myself it's all untrue, the whole world has got it wrong, and signs only become signs because you're watching out for them. I have to admit that between my leaving Gibelet and the end of my stay in Constantinople, nothing out of the ordinary happened to me. Nothing that can't be explained in terms of life's usual ups and downs. What about old Idris's death, followed by that of Marmontel? I was shaken by both events at the time, but it's in the order of things that an old man should die and a ship be wrecked. The same thing applies to the fire in the Wallachian collector's palace. In a big city with so many wooden buildings, such incidents are a commonplace. It's true that in every one of these cases Mazandarani's book was involved. In normal times I'd have found that intriguing, fascinating, but I'd have recited a few opposite proverbs, then returned to my usual commercial concerns. It was during my sea voyage that the citadel of my reason was undermined. I am quite lucid now when I say this, and I am quite lucid when I say nothing special happened that might be regarded as the cause of such a development. Nothing but the vaguest of impressions, those abnormally gloomy days, that sudden storm as suddenly dying out, and all those people moving about silently in the fog, as if they were already lost souls. Then I set foot on the ladder of Smyrna, uncertainly, but hoping I'd gradually recover my composure, and in the city that so many European merchants love to visit, become once more the Genoese merchant I am and always have been. But alas, so much has been happening since I got here. I've had no time to recover. I can no longer speak of accidental circumstances and act as if, at the end of a journey, instigated by fear of the coming year, it was pure chance that brought me to the very place where the end of the world was going to be announced, Smyrna. Whereas when I left Gibelet, I hadn't the slightest intention of coming here. I had to change my route because of a woman who wasn't supposed to come on the journey at all. As if Marta was meant to lead me to the place where my fate awaited me, where suddenly the meaning of all that happened on the journey was revealed at last. Now, each of the events that contributed to my being here can be seen, if not as a sign, then at least as a milestone on the winding path that was traced for me by Providence. Though I went through all its stages believing I was my own guide, should I go on pretending to decide things for myself? Or, in the name of reason and free will, claim that I came to Smyrna of my own volition and that it was by chance that I landed here at the very moment the end of the world was announced? But may I not be describing as lucidity what is really just blindness? I have asked myself that question before, and it seems to me I'll have to go on asking it without any hope of an answer. Why am I saying all this? Why am I arguing with myself? Probably because the friend with whom I was reunited today told me what I ought to have told myself months ago. I was ashamed to disagree with him face to face and thus reveal my own feeble-mindedness. But perhaps before dealing with this encounter at more length, I should set down today's events in general. Today, as yesterday and the day before yesterday, most people in Smyrna did very little work. In the morning, the rumor was already circulating that Sabbatai had proclaimed Monday a new Sabbath to be observed in the same way as the usual one. No one could tell me if he meant just today or all future Mondays. An English merchant whom I met in the street remarked that with the Turks Friday, the Jews Saturday, our own Sunday, and now Sabbatai's Monday, a full week's work wasn't going to amount to much. For the moment, as I have already said, no one dreams of working at all, apart from the sellers of sweetmeats for whom these days of unexpected rejoicing are a godsend. People just wander about, not only the Jews, but especially them, from party to party, from one procession to another, arguing fiercely. Strolling this afternoon near the Portuguese synagogue, I witnessed a strange scene taking place in a little square. A crowd had gathered round a young woman lying on the ground outside a house and apparently suffering from convulsions. She was speaking in broken phrases, and all I could make out was the odd word like the Anointed One, captives, and thy kingdom. But the onlookers seemed to be listening closely, and someone behind me told me his neighbor, she's Eliakim's Haber's daughter. She's prophesizing. She can see King Sabbatai sitting on his throne. I walked on, leaving the young woman still prophesizing. I felt uncomfortable, as if I'd gone into a house where someone was dying without being a member of the family or even a neighbor. And indeed, it seems fate was awaiting me elsewhere. When I left the square, I plunged straight into a series of alleys, as if I knew where I was going and whom I was going to meet. But perhaps before dealing with this encounter at more length, I should set down today's events in general. Today, as yesterday and the day before yesterday, most people in Smyrna did very little work. In the morning, the rumor was already circulating that Sabbatai had proclaimed Monday a new Sabbath to be observed in the same way as the usual one. No one could tell me if he meant just today or all future Mondays. An English merchant whom I met in the street remarked that with the Turks Friday, the Jews Saturday, our own Sunday, and now Sabbatai's Monday, a full week's work wasn't going to amount to much. For the moment, as I have already said, no one dreams of working at all apart from the sellers of sweetmeats for whom these days of unexpected rejoicing are a godsend. People just wander about, not only the Jews, but especially them, from party to party, from one procession to another, arguing fiercely. Strolling this afternoon near the Portuguese synagogue, I witnessed a strange scene taking place in a little square. A crowd had gathered round a young woman lying on the ground outside a house and apparently suffering from convulsions. She was speaking in broken phrases. All I could make out was the odd word like the Anointed One, captives, and thy kingdom. But the onlookers seemed to be listening closely, and someone behind me told his neighbor, she's Eliakim Haber's daughter. She's prophesizing. She can see King Sabbatai sitting on his throne. I walked on, leaving the young woman still prophesying. I felt uncomfortable, as if I'd gone into a house where someone was dying without being a member of the family or even a neighbor. And indeed, it seems fate was awaiting me elsewhere. When I left the square, I plunged straight into a series of alleys, as if I knew where I was going and whom I was going to meet. I came out into a wider street where a crowd of people were all looking in the same direction. A procession was just arriving, led by Sabbatai. This was the second time I'd seen him in 2 days. Today, too, he was singing loudly, not a psalm or a prayer or a hymn of praise, but strangely enough, a love song, an old Spanish ballad. I met Mariselda, the king's daughter, radiant and beautiful. His face was red like his beard, and his eyes shone like those of a young man in love. People from the houses lining the street had brought out their most valuable carpets and spread them before him, so that his feet never had to touch the sand or gravel. Although it's December, the weather was neither cold nor wet. A lightly veiled sun bathed the city and its inhabitants in a spring-like glow. The scene I witnessed couldn't have taken place if it had been raining. The carpets would have been soggy with mud, and the Spanish ballad would have called forth only tears and longing. As it was, on this mild winter's day, the thought of the end of the world brought with it no sadness or regret. For a moment I saw it as the beginning of a long, festive eternity. Yes, I began to wonder, I, an intruder, but there were many other intruders besides me in the Jewish quarter today, if I hadn't been wrong to fear the approach of the fateful year. I realized that the period I'd got used to associating with terror had in fact taught me what love is, and caused me to live more intensely than at any other time in my life. I even went so far as to tell myself I felt younger today than when I was 20, and to fancy that feeling would last indefinitely. And then a friend appeared and put me at odds with the apocalypse again. Maymun, curse him, bless him, the last ally of my failing reason, the destroyer of my illusions. We fell into one another's arms. I was happy to embrace my best Jewish friend. He was glad to get away from all the Jews on earth and take refuge in the bosom of a Gentile. He'd been walking at the end of the procession, looking preoccupied and depressed. As soon as he saw me, he stepped out of line at once and drew me aside. "Let's get out of here. I have to talk to you." We hurried down the hill towards the road round the harbor where the foreign merchants live. "A French caterer had just opened a shop near the customs house," said Maymun. "Let's go and have supper there and drink some of his wine." On the way he started to tell me his troubles. His father, overcome with religious fervor, had suddenly decided to sell everything he possessed for a song in order to come to Smyrna. "Forgive me, Balthasar, my friend. There are things I didn't tell you during our long conversations. They were still secret then, and I didn't want to betray my family's trust. But now, unfortunately, everything has come out. You won't have heard of Sabbatai Sevi before you came to Smyrna, except perhaps in Constantinople." "No," I said. "Not until I got here." "I met him last summer in Aleppo. He stayed there for a few weeks, and my father even asked him to visit us. He was very different then from the character you see today. He was reserved, modestly spoken, didn't call himself king or messiah, and didn't strut around the streets singing. So his visit to Aleppo didn't cause any stir except in our community. With us, it was the beginning of a debate that's still going on, because members of Sabbatai's entourage were already whispering that he was the expected Messiah, that a prophet from Gaza called Nathan Ashkenazi had recognized him as such, and that before long he would manifest himself. People were and still are divided about him. We had 3 letters from Egypt saying there was no doubt that he was the Messiah, but a highly respected Hakam wrote from Jerusalem to tell us he was an impostor and we must be aware of everything he said and did. Every family was split over him, ours worse than the rest. From the moment he first heard of him, my father lived only for his coming. Whereas I, his only son, flesh of his flesh, didn't believe in the Sabbatai for a single second. It will all end very badly. Our people who for centuries have lived quietly and moderately, never raising their voices, have suddenly started shouting that their king will soon rule over the whole world, and the Ottoman Sultan will kneel down before him and offer him his throne. Yes, they say such crazy things out loud, heedless of the fact that they may be unleashing the Sultan's wrath upon us. Stop being afraid of the Sultan, my father tells me, and he spent his whole life quaking at the shadow of the lowliest official sent by the Sublime Porte. Why be afraid of the Sultan? His day is done. The age of the resurrection is about to begin. My father was determined to go to Constantinople, as I told you, but I went instead for fear he wouldn't be able to bear the hardships of the journey. He promised to wait for me, and I promised to bring back the opinions of the most eminent hakams, those who are universally respected by all our people. I kept my promise, but my father didn't keep his. As soon as I got to the capital, I set out to visit all the most learned men, one after the other, carefully noting down what each of them said, but my father was too impatient to wait. One day I heard that he'd left Aleppo with 2 rabbis and a few other worthies. Their caravan passed through Tarsus 2 weeks before ours, then followed the coast road to Smyrna. Before leaving home, my father had sold all we possessed. "Why did you do that?" I asked him. He answered, "What use of us are we a few stones in Aleppo if the age of the resurrection has already begun?" I said, "But what if this man wasn't the Messiah, and if the time of the resurrection hadn't already come?" My father answered, "If you won't share my happiness, you're no longer my son." Yes, he sold everything, then came and laid the money at Sabbatai's feet, and Sabbatai, to show his gratitude, has just made him a king. Yes, Balthasar, we must celebrate. My father's been made a king. I am not the son of Isaac the jeweler anymore. I am the son of King Asa. You must treat me with great respect. And he poured himself a good swig of French wine. I felt rather at a loss, not knowing how far I ought to join in his sarcastic remarks. "Perhaps I should point out," added my friend, "that Sabbatai appointed no fewer than 7 kings today, and yesterday it was a dozen. No other city has ever entertained so many kings at once." Presented like this, the strange events I have just witnessed do look like a lamentable piece of tomfoolery. But should I believe that my moon tells me? Or ought I to contradict him and tell him why I myself am troubled, though I haven't believed in miracles for a long time, and for a long time have silently scorned anyone who does? But I didn't argue with him. I'd have been ashamed to admit that though I am not a Jew, and though I don't expect what they expect, I am troubled by all these inexplicable coincidences, all these signs. I'd have been ashamed to see from his expression that he was disappointed with and contemptuous of my present feeble-mindedness. And as I didn't want to say the opposite of what I think, either I just listened to what he said. I hope he's right. I hope with my whole being that 1666 will be an ordinary year, with ordinary joys and sorrows, and that I and my nearest and dearest will get right through it just as I have got through 40 or so other years. But I can't convince myself. None of those other years presented itself like this. None of them was introduced by signs and portents. The closer it gets, the more the fabric of the world seems to unravel, as if the threads were going to be woven again into something different. Forgive me, my moon, my friend, if it's I who am wrong, as I forgive you if it's you, and forgive me too for seeming to agree with you as we sat drinking French wine and then answering you back now in these pages unbeknown to you. What else was I to do? The words we speak leave marks in people's hearts. The words we write lie buried and cold in their leather tomb, especially mine, which no one will ever read. 15 December 1665. There are only 17 days of this year left, and from the customs house to the old citadel, Smyrna is swept with rumors. Some are alarmist. The Sultan was supposed to have ordered Sabbatai to be put in irons and taken under guard to Constantinople, but the so-called Messiah was still here that same evening, honored by his followers and said to have appointed 7 more kings, among them one of the town's beggars called the Red Abraham. Other rumors speak of a mysterious character who is supposed to have appeared at the door of a synagogue, an old man with a long silky beard whom no one had ever set eyes on before. Asked who he was, he claimed to be the prophet Elijah, and told the Jews to rally round Sabbatai. Sabbatai, according to Maimun, still has many detractors among the rabbis and also among the wealthy merchants of the community. But they don't dare attack him in public now, and instead shut themselves up at home for fear of being dubbed infidels and unbelievers by the mob. It's said some of them have even left Smyrna altogether, heading for Magnesia. Today at noon I invited Maimun to eat with me at the French caterer's. He paid for everything yesterday evening, though as his father has lost a family fortune, he must be hard up or soon will be. But I didn't want to annoy him by mentioning it, so I let him treat me. The cooking there is the best in the whole of the empire, and I'm delighted to have found the place. There are 2 other French eating houses in Smyrna, but this one is the most popular, and the Frenchman doesn't hesitate to sing the praises of his wine, nor do the Turks hesitate to drink it. On the other hand, he doesn't serve ham, and pretends not to like it much himself. I'm not sorry. When I went back there and shall continue to do so all the time I'm here. It was a mistake, though, to tell Father Jean-Baptiste of my discovery. He rebuked me for setting foot under the roof of a Huguenot and drinking the wine of heresy. But we weren't alone when he produced this ridiculous phrase, and I suspect he was only saying what the other people wanted to hear. He himself has lived in the Levant long enough to know that good wine has no color and no spirit but its own. 16 December. I invited Martha to Master Ezekiel Moinas at midday today. That's the name of the French caterer. I'm not sure she liked the food, but she was pleased with the invitation and did a bit more than justice to the wine. I managed to stop her halfway between gaiety and tipsiness. Back at the monastery, we found ourselves alone when everyone was due to take a siesta. We were longing to fall into one another's arms, and without any attempt at prudence, that's what we did. I was listening all the time in case my nephews or one of the monks should catch us unawares. I didn't worry about my clerk. He knows how to see and hear nothing when necessary, but the anxiety didn't spoil our pleasure. On the contrary, it was as if every second might be the last and had to be worth its weight in pleasure even more than the second before. So our love-making grew even more vigorous, intense, and abandoned. Our bodies were redolent of warm wine, and we promised each other years of happiness, whether the world lives or dies. We were exhausted long before anyone turned up. She fell asleep, and I'd have liked to do the same, but it would have been too risky. I gently adjusted her gown, then covered her up to the neck with a modest blanket. Then I wrote these lines in my journal. My nephews didn't come back until the middle of the night, and I haven't seen Father Jean-Baptiste again. He had visitors yesterday and probably spent the whole day with them. Much good may it have done them all. They'll have collected a lot of fresh rumors. All I collected was wine like dew from a pair of willing lips. If only the world would always pass us by as it did today. If only we could live and love each other in the half light day after day, forgetting all about prophecies, getting drunk on heretical wine and forbidden love. Lord, only thou can arrange for thy will not to be done. 17 December. I left the Capuchin monastery today and went to stay in the house of an English merchant I'd never met before. Yet another of the strange things that happen to me these days, as if to remind me we're not living in ordinary times. So here I am installed in someone else's house as if it were my own, and this evening I am writing these pages on cherrywood desk, shiny with red lacquer, in the light shed from a solid silver candlestick. Martha's waiting for me. She has a room of her own here, opening off mine, and tonight and all the nights that follow, I shall be sleeping with her in her bed. It all happened very quickly, as if the business had been settled beforehand in heaven, and all we humans had to do was meet here below and shake hands on it. The meeting place was, of course, the Huguenots' eating house, where I now go every day, sometimes more than once. This morning I'd only dropped in for a glass of wine and some olives before having lunch at the monastery. 2 men were already sitting at a table there, and the Frenchman introduced us. One was English and the other Dutch, but they seemed good friends despite the fact that their countries don't get on too well. I'd had occasion to tell Master Moina my profession, and it so happens that my Englishman, Cornelius Wheeler by name, is also a dealer in curios. The other, the Dutchman, is a Protestant pastor called Conan, very tall and thin, with the knobbly, bald skull typical of certain old men. I soon learned that my colleague was getting ready to leave Smyrna late in the day for England. His shop was already waiting alongside. His departure had been decided on in haste for family reasons I wasn't told about, so no arrangements have been made about the house. We'd been sitting together for barely a quarter of an hour, and I was conversing politely with the pastor about the Embriachi's past, Gibelette, Sabbatai, and current events, while Wheeler said little and seemed scarcely to hear what we said, so deeply was he absorbed in his own worries. Then he suddenly emerged from his torpor and asked me point blank if I'd care to stay at his place for a while. "If we're soon to find ourselves living in the reign of chaos," he said, "I'd like to know my house is being looked after by a noble spirit." Not wanting to seem too eager, I explained that I was only in Smyrna for a short time to settle some urgent business, so I too might have to leave from one day to the next. But I couldn't have sounded very convincing, for he didn't bother to answer my objection and just asked if I'd mind taking a stroll with him and the pastor so that he could show me my new home. I think I've already mentioned that Foreigners' Quarter is a long avenue running along the beach. It's lined on both sides with shops, warehouses, workrooms, 100 or so houses, a few well-reputed caterers, and 4 churches, including that of the Capuchins. The houses overlooking the sea are more sought after than those giving on to the hill, the old citadel, and the districts inhabited by the local people, Turks, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews. Wheeler's place is neither the biggest nor the safest of the houses. It's at the end of the avenue, and the sea practically knocks at the door. Even when it's calm, as it was today, you can hear the roar of the waves. When there's a swell, the noise must be deafening. The most attractive thing about the place is the huge room I'm in at the moment. It's surrounded by the bedrooms and full of statues, statuettes, fragments of ancient columns, and bits of mosaic, all excavated by Wheeler himself, who does a good trade in such articles. What I can see all around me, and what makes me feel as if I'm living on the site of some Greek temple or antique villa, must be the remains of the remains. Nothing but items that are cracked or broken, or have bits broken off them, or of which there are 3 or 4 examples. The best pieces have no doubt been dispatched to London, where my host will have sold them at a handsome profit. Good luck to him. I know from experience that the people round here will never buy such things. Those who have the means to acquire them don't appreciate them, and most Turks, if they don't regard them as meaningless, are eager to deface or destroy them on religious grounds. When he embarked yesterday, Wheeler took a number of packing cases with him, despite the fact that he was leaving at short notice. The largest and heaviest crate, as he told me himself, contained a magnificent sarcophagus ornamented with bas reliefs that had been found in Philadelphia. Having accepted his invitation about the house, I obviously couldn't but join the pastor and see my host off on his journey. This turned out to be fortunate for him, as we found when we reached the harbor that the dockers were refusing to load any cargoes, no matter how much money they were offered. I couldn't discover the reason for this, but their attitude fits in with the general atmosphere of confusion, demoralization, touchiness, and irresponsibility. I enlisted the help of Hatim and my nephews, so we had the help of 7 pairs of arms, including those of the pastor and of Wheeler's own clerk, to get the crates safely on board. Only the sarcophagus was too much for us, and we had to bribe some sailors to haul it up on ropes. After thanking the Capuchins for their hospitality and leaving a generous contribution towards the repair of their church, damaged in the last earthquake, I came and settled in here with all my traveling companions. Wheeler has left us a young servant maid with an evasive expression who hasn't been with him long and whom he suspected of pilfering food and crockery. Perhaps money and clothes as well, he wasn't sure. If I shouldn't decide to dismiss her, I wasn't to hesitate. Why hadn't he done so himself? I didn't ask. I haven't seen much of her yet. She's been through the house a couple of times, barefoot, with eyes downcast and wrapped in a red and black check shawl. We have shared out the bedrooms. There are 6 altogether, not counting the maid's, which is on the roof and reached by a ladder. Hatim has taken the room usually occupied by our host's own clerk. Each of my nephews has a room to himself, and so do Marta and I, to keep up appearances, though I have no intention of sleeping in a different room from her. I'm going to join her now. 18th December. There's still 1 bedroom free in Wheeler's house, and this morning I offered it to Maymoon. Ever since he's been in Smyrna, he's lived with his father in the house of a man from Aleppo called Isaac Lanyado, an ardent supporter of Sabbatai and next-door neighbor to the Messiah's family. This has been forcing my friend to conceal his true feelings, and he told me, sighing, that he didn't know if he could bear another long Sabbath in their company. But he declined my invitation. It's when our nearest and dearest lose their way that we ought to stay close to them, he said, and I didn't insist. In the town itself, a quiet chaos still reigns. People have lost their fear of the law, as if the kingdom that is to come will be one of mercy and forgiveness, not of discipline and order. But this sense of impunity doesn't lead to unbridled violence. There are no riots, no bloodshed or looting. The wolf lies down with the lamb without trying to eat it, as it says somewhere in the scriptures. This evening, a score of Jews, men and women, went down from their own quarter to the harbor singing Masilelda, the king's daughter, and waving torches, thus breaking both their own law, and which forbids them to kindle a fire on Friday evening, and the law of the country, which allows only foreign merchants to use torches when they go out at night. Not far from here, the Jews met a patrol of Janissaries marching behind their officer. The singing wavered for a moment, then went on again louder than before, each group going on its way without taking any notice of the other. How much longer will this exaltation last? One more day? 40? Those who believe in Sabbatai say forever and ever. A new era will soon begin, they declare, and it will never end. Once the resurrection has begun, it will never stop. Resurrection will not be followed by death. What will end is humiliation, subservience, captivity, exile, diaspora. And where do I come in all this? What ought I to be hoping for? Maymun blames his father for abandoning everything to follow his king-come Messiah. But haven't I done something much worse? Haven't I left my own hometown, my occupation, and my quiet life just because of rumors of an apocalypse and without even hoping for salvation? Aren't I just as crazy as these misguided folk walking about brandishing torches on the night of the Sabbath? I am defying the laws of religion and of the country by sleeping with a woman who's not my wife and may still be the wife of another, with the knowledge of all my entourage. How much longer can I go on living this lie? And above all, how long shall I escape unpunished? But if the prospect of punishment does occasionally occur to me, it doesn't turn me away from my desires. The thought that God can see me bothers me less than the thought that other people do. Last night, for the first time, I took Martha in my arms without having to check the windows and doors, without having to listen for footsteps. Slowly I undressed her, slowly undid the ribbons and buttons and let her clothes fall on the floor, then blew out the candle. She raised her arm and hid her eyes, only her eyes. I took her hand and led her over to the bed, laid her down, and lay down beside her. Her body smelled of the scent we bought together in the Genoese merchant shop in Constantinople. I whispered that I loved her and always would. As I breathed into her ear, she put her arms round me and drew me to her warm body, murmuring words of joy, eagerness, consent, abandon. I made love to her with the fire of a lover and the serenity of a husband. Could I have done so if everything around us in the city and in the world hadn't been in this supreme state of exaltation, of unreality? 19 December. The Dutch pastor paid me a visit early this morning, saying he just wanted to make sure I was comfortable in his friend's house. When I answered with some enthusiasm that I was already living there as if the place was my own, he saw fit to reply that I must never forget that it was not. I was annoyed at this unnecessary remark and pointed out shortly that I had merely been trying to express my gratitude. I'd agreed to come here only in order to be of service, I told him. I'd been quite happy at the monastery and could easily go back there. I thought he'd put up on his hat then leave, or perhaps ask me to go and take all my tribe with me. But after a moment's hesitation, he gave a little laugh, apologized, coughed, and said there must have been a misunderstanding. His Italian wasn't very good. In fact, he speaks it as well as I do. In short, he tried so hard to put matters right that when he got up to go 5 minutes later, I laid my hand on his arm and asked him to stay for a cup of coffee. My wife was just getting it ready, I said. After this somewhat awkward start, our conversation took a more agreeable turn, and I soon found I was talking to a sensible fellow and a scholar. He told me that for several months a number of European cities had been buzzing with rumors about the lost tribes of Israel. They are said to have seized Arabia, defeated the Ottoman forces, and even advanced as far as Morocco. People say that this year the caravan of the pilgrims, which should have set out from Tunis to Mecca, gave up the idea for fear of meeting the lost tribes on the way. Conan himself doesn't believe these rumors and thinks they're put about by Vienna, which is being besieged by the troops of the Sultan, and by Venice, which has been at war with the Sublime Porte for 30 years and is trying to get up its courage with the thought of the unexpected allies preparing to attack the Muslims from the rear. The Dutch minister says that every month travelers passing through Smyrna bring him letters to this effect from Holland, France, Sweden, and especially England, where many people are on the lookout for strange events that might herald the end of the world and Christ's second coming. What's happening in Smyrna can only sharpen their expectations. I told Conan that I myself had been following these events with great interest, had seen the so-called Messiah twice with my own eyes, and was very troubled by it all. When I added that a Jewish friend of mine was highly skeptical, Conan was anxious to meet him, and I promised to pass his invitation on to Maimun as soon as possible. Going over the thing that had worried me most in the last few days, I mentioned the inexplicable fact that the Qadi had let Sabbatai go free last Sunday, and further that the authorities had so far done nothing to cut the current excesses short and get the people back to work. The pastor replied that according to reliable sources, the judge had been given a large sum of money by certain wealthy Jewish merchants, supporters of Sabbatai, to leave the self-proclaimed Messiah alone. I don't know, said I, how corrupt the Ottoman officials may be, nor how much they are motivated by sheer greed, but what we see at present is utter chaos, and as soon as Constantinople finds out what's going on here, heads are going to roll. Do you really think that the Qadi would risk his own head for a handful of gold? My young friend, he answered, if you think men always act sensibly, it shows you have no idea how the world wags. Irrationality is the creative principle of history. In his opinion, he went on, the reason why the Qadi had let Sabbatai go free was not only that he himself had been bribed, but also because he must have concluded that a man who came before him singing psalms must be a mere madman, a danger perhaps to his own community, but no threat whatsoever to the power of the Sultan. Conan must have been told this by a janissary responsible for the security of the Dutch merchants, and is probably what the Qadi himself hints to his janissaries to excuse his tolerance. On a completely different plane, I saw today that my nephew Boumé had let his hair and beard grow. I wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been wearing a loose white shirt that makes him look like a certain kind of dervish. He's out all day and hardly opens his mouth when he comes back in the evening. Perhaps I ought to ask him why he's dressing up like that. 20th December. Maimun has come and sought refuge here. I welcomed him with open arms and put him in the last spare bedroom, which I'd intended for him all along. Though he declined my invitation before, something happened this morning to make him change his mind. He's still very shaken. His father asked him to go with him to see Sabbatai. It wasn't the first time he'd been, but before he'd always managed to stay in the background, mingling with the crowd and observing from a distance the manifestations of allegiance and enthusiasm. But this time, his father, now a king, insisted that he approach their benefactor and ask for his blessing. My father did as he was asked, went forward with his eyes downcast. My friend did as he was asked, went forward with his eyes downcast, hurriedly kissed the Messiah's hand, and as soon as he could tried to step back to make way for others. But Sabbatai, holding him back by the sleeve and forcing him to look up, spoke to him in a friendly manner and asked him 2 or 3 questions. Then suddenly he raised his voice louder and asked Maimun, his father, and a couple of rabbis from Aleppo who were with them, to utter the ineffable name of God. The others obeyed, but Maimun, though he was the most pious of them all, hesitated. He might not invariably follow the precepts of the faith to the letter, and sometimes in the synagogue he would mutter the prayers half-heartedly as if his heart was not quite in harmony with what his lips professed. But between such backslidings and committing the sin now being asked of him, there was an insuperable difference. So Maimun remained silent, hoping Sabbatai would be satisfied with being obeyed by the other three. Little did he know. The self-styled Messiah went on holding him by the sleeve and started explaining to the assembled company that in this new age, what was formerly forbidden is forbidden no longer, that those who believe in the emergence of the new era shouldn't be afraid of transgressing, and those who have faith in him, Sabbatai, should know he wouldn't ask them to do anything incompatible with the true will of the Most High, especially if it appears to contradict what only seems to be his will. By now all eyes were on my friend, including those of his own father, who bade him trust our King and Messiah, and do as he asked. "I'd never have thought I'd live to see the day," Maimun told me, "when my father, who brought me up to respect our law, would ask me to break it in the worst possible manner. For such a thing to happen, for piety to be confused with impiety in that way, the end of the world really must be at hand." He lapsed into the thought and melancholy. I had to interrupt this reverie to make him finish the story. "So what did you do?" "I told Sabbatai that what he was asking of me was a serious matter, and I needed to pray first. Then, without asking leave, I withdrew, and as soon as I got outside, I came straight here." He swore that until this madness is over, he won't set foot in the Jewish quarter again. I told him he was quite right, and that I was delighted to welcome him under my roof. I went on to tell him about the visit of the Dutch pastor and Conan's desire to meet him. He didn't refuse, but indicated that he'd rather put it off for a few days. For the moment, he didn't feel like talking to a stranger about what had happened. My mind's still in a whirl. I'm confused. I don't want to say something I'll regret the next day. I said there wasn't any hurry, and it would be best if we both distanced ourselves from all this bother. Monday, 21 December, 1665. Are there really some honest officials in the Ottoman Empire? I hardly dare say so. It's strange enough that I can even ask the question. For some days, Martha's been saying we ought to take up here the approaches we made in Constantinople in the hope that they might meet with more success in Smyrna. So I went to see Abdullatif, the clerk at the local prison, who I'd been told kept a record of all the sentences passed in this part of the Asia Minor and the Aegean Islands. He let me set out my request, took notes, asked for a few more details, then said it would take him a week to look into the matter before he could give me a satisfactory answer. This, of course, brought back an unpleasant memory of the clerk in the armory of the Sultan's palace, who'd got one sum of money after another out of us on the pretext of having to consult a series of different ledgers. But I decided in advance that I'd pay up without making too much fuss, if only to show Martha I'd do anything for her. So I asked the man the usual question about how much his informants would have to be paid. My hand was already in my purse, but the man plainly signed to me to take it out again. "Why should your honor pay?" he asked. "You haven't got anything yet." Not wanting to annoy him by insisting, I withdrew, saying I'd come back in a week, and that I prayed heaven would reward him as he deserved. No honest man could object to that. Marta and Hatim had been waiting for me outside in the shade of a walnut tree. I told them what had happened, word for word. Marta said she was sure everything would be all right. Perhaps Providence was about to look favorably on her cause at last. My clerk was more skeptical. In his view, when the powers that be are kind, it's only a sign that some worse disaster is on the way. We shall see. Normally, I'd agree with him, but today I am not entirely without hope. So many incredible things are happening. A wind of strangeness is sweeping through the world. I don't think anything will ever surprise me again. December 23, 1665. I am trembling. I can hardly speak. Shall I be able to tell what happened as if it had happened to someone else, without shrieking at every line and talking all the time about signs and wonders? Perhaps I ought to have waited for my emotions to settle down inside me in the depths of my soul like grounds in a cup of coffee, to have let a couple of days go by or even a week. But when today's events have cooled, others will have come along, still boiling hot. So, as long as I can, I'd better stick to my decision to write down every day the evil thereof. To every date its own self-contained account, without reading over what I've written, just turning each last page as I finish it so that the one that follows is ready to record the next batch of astonishments, until the day comes when the page will remain blank, the end, my own end, or the end of the world. But let me go back to the beginning as far as today is concerned. This afternoon, having managed to overcome my moon's reservations, I took him to see Pastor Conan. He welcomed us warmly, served us some delicious Turkish sweetmeats with our coffee, then started talking in moderate terms about Sabbatai, observing my friend's reactions out of the corner of his eye. First, he repeated some highly laudatory references to Jesus on the part of the alleged Messiah. Christ's soul, he said, was indissolubly linked to his own. I'll see that he now takes his place among the prophets. He's supposed to have said before witnesses. Maimun confirmed that Sabbatai always referred to Jesus in respectful and affectionate terms and often spoke sadly of the sufferings inflicted upon him. The pastor said he was both surprised and delighted to hear this, but regretted that Sabbatai was not equally exemplary when speaking of women. Has he not promised to make them equal to their husbands and free them from the curse of Eve? That's what I have heard from a reliable source. According to him, women ought in the future to live just as they please, without having to obey any man. He looked inquiringly at Maimun, who with some reluctance confirmed that this was so. He's even supposed to have said, the pastor went on, that men and women ought not to be kept separate anymore, either at home or in the synagogue, and that soon in the kingdom he wants to create everyone will be able to go with anyone he desires without restriction or shame. I have never heard that, said Maimun firmly, or anything like it. He shot me a glance that seemed to ask why on earth I'd got him into this. I stood up. You have some splendid things here, I said. Would you allow me as a colleague to have a look around? Of course! I was hoping my friend would stand up too and make use of the diversion I'd created to change an embarrassing subject and interrupt what was turning into a cross-examination. But to avoid offending our host, he stayed where he was. Admittedly, if we'd both leaped up at the same time, our attempt at evasion would have been obvious and rather uncouth. So the conversation went on without me, though I listened to every word and took in very little of the furniture, books, and curios I was supposed to be inspecting. Behind me, Maimun was explaining to Conan that most rabbis didn't believe in Sabbatai, but they didn't dare say so openly because the whole populace was on his side. Anyone who refused to recognize him as king and Messiah had to hide or even leave the city or risk being attacked in the street. Is it true Sabbatai said he was going to Constantinople in a few days' time to take possession of the Sultan's crown and sit in his place on the throne? Maimun sounded horrified at this, and his voice rose. Do you set much store by what I tell you? He asked. Of course, the pastor seemed rather taken aback. Of all the good people I've questioned, you are the most sensible, the most accurate, and the most observant. Believe me then when I tell you Sabbatai has never at any time made such claims. Yet the person who told them about is very close to him. Conan lowered his voice and spoke, a name I couldn't catch. I did hear Maimun's angry reply. That rabbi is crazy. Anyone who says such things is crazy, whether they're Sabbatai's supporters who think the world belongs to them already, or his enemies who do anything to destroy him. If such foolishness ever comes to the ears of the Sultan, all the Jews will be slaughtered together with all the other inhabitants in Smyrna. Conan agreed and started on another tack. Is it true that there was a letter from Egypt? But I didn't hear what followed. I was gazing at something on a low shelf hidden behind a table from Zealand, a statuette that looked familiar. My statuette of the two lovers miraculously preserved. I bent down, then crouched to take hold of it, stroking it and turning it this way and that in my hands. No doubt about it, those two conical heads covered with gold leaf, this strange kind of rust joining the two hands together, uniting them beyond death. There's nothing else like it in the whole world. I waited a few seconds, swallowing 2 or 3 times lest my voice betray me. Your Honor, where did this come from? Those statuettes. Wheeler gave them to me. Did he tell you if he dug them up himself? I asked disingenuously. No, I was visiting him one day and a man came knocking at the door trying to sell him some things from a cart. Cornelius bought almost everything he had, and as I'd shown an interest in those votive statuettes, which probably come from some ancient temple, he hesitated on making me a present. He insisted on making me a present of them. But for an important dealer in curios like you, such things must be 2 a penny. Yes, some have passed through my hands, but this one is different from all the others. You must have a better eye than I have for this sort of thing. What's special about it? The pastor didn't seem particularly interested in what I was saying. He listened to me and asked me a few questions out of politeness, no doubt thinking my reactions were quite commonplace in a man really devoted to his profession and just waiting for me to resume my tour of inspection, so that he could get back to the only subject that concerned him today, Sabbatai. So I went over to him, carefully carrying the 2 lovers. What's special about this statuette is that it consists, as you see, of 2 figures accidentally rested together. It's a very rare phenomenon, and I'd recognize it anywhere. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that 4 months ago it was in my own shop in Gibelet. I gave it for nothing to the Chevalier de Marmontel, the envoy of the King of France, who just bought a rare book from me for a very large sum of money. He set sail from Tripoli, taking the statuette with him, but it was shipwrecked before reaching Constantinople. And now I find my statuette here on this shelf. Conan could remain seated no longer. He was as pale as if I'd accused him of theft or murder. I warned Wheeler against those bandits disguised as beggars who go round peddling valuable objects. They're out-and-out scoundrels. All of them. And now I feel as if I were their accomplice, a receiver of stolen goods. My house is defiled. May God punish you, Wheeler. I did my best to reassure him, saying neither he nor the Englishman was to blame. They didn't know where the things had come from. At the same time, I questioned him discreetly about what else the peddler had with him besides my lovers. Of course, I was anxious to find out if the 100th name had survived too. Hadn't it been taken on the same ship, among the same baggage? I know a book is more perishable than a metal statuette, and the wreckers who caused the loss of the ship and murdered the men on it to get a hold of its cargo are likely to have kept the statuettes covered in gold leaf and tossed a mere book overboard. Cornelius bought a lot of things from that fellow. Any books? Yes, one. I didn't dream I'd get such a plain answer. A book in Arabic that seemed to astonish him. As long as the peddler was still there, Conan told me his friend hadn't seemed to attach any importance to the book, but as soon as he left, very pleased with himself at having got rid of so many of his wares, the Englishman's enthusiasm knew no bounds. He kept examining the book from every angle and reading and rereading the first passage. He seemed so pleased with it that when I asked him a question about the age of the statuettes, he gave them to me there and then. He would take no denial and told his clerk to wrap them up and deliver them to my house. Did he say anything about the book? Not much. That it was rare and that for years a lot of his customers had been asking him to find them a copy, imagining it would put them in possession of some kind of magic power and afford them divine protection. It was a sort of talisman. I remember telling him a true believer didn't need such devices to win heaven's favor. It was enough to do good and say the prayers. Our Savior taught us. Wheeler agreed and said he didn't believe in such nonsense himself, but as a dealer, he was glad to have acquired a much sought-after item that he could sell at a good price. Conan then resumed his lamentations, wondering if God would forgive him for having, in an unguarded moment, accepted a present he suspected of being of doubtful provenance. As for me, I found, and still find, myself back in a number of dilemmas I thought were things of the past. If the 100th name still exists, shouldn't I start looking for it again? The book's kind of a siren. No one who's heard her song can ever forget her, and I have done more than hear the song. I have held the siren in my arms, stroked her, possessed her briefly, before she escaped and headed for the open sea. She sank beneath the waves, and I thought she was swallowed up forever. But a siren cannot drown, and scarcely had I begun to forget that she rises up before me to remind me of my duties as a bewitched lover. So where is the book now? Wheeler's never mentioned it to me again. I don't know if he took it with him to England or left it in his house in Smyrna. In Smyrna? In his house? In other words, in mine? Can anyone blame me if I'm trembling and can hardly speak? 24 December. Nothing I did today was a crime, but no doubt I am guilty of abusing Mr. Wheeler's hospitality, searching from top to bottom a house I have been lent as if it were the den of a receiver of stolen goods. I trust my Englishman will forgive me. I had no choice. I had to try to find the book that made me set out on my travels, not with any very high hopes of success. I'd have been greatly surprised if my colleague, knowing how important the book is, had left it behind. I wouldn't go so far as to suppose it's because of the 100th name that he suddenly decided to go away, leaving his house and possessions to be looked after by a stranger, but I can't rule out the possibility altogether. Conan says Cornelius Wheeler belongs to a family of booksellers who for a long time have had a shop in the old St. Paul's Market in London. I've never actually been either to London or to the market, but both must have seemed familiar to anyone who trades in antique books. Just as the name of the house of Embriacho in Gibelet must be familiar to some booksellers and collectors in London and Oxford, or so I like to think. It is as if all those who love the same things were linked together across the seas by an invisible thread, and in my merchant's heart I believe the world would be a better and more cordial place if there were many such threads woven into an ever thicker and stronger fabric. At present, however, it gives me no pleasure to know that someone on the other side of the world wants to get a hold of the same book as I do, and that the book itself is on a ship bound for England. Will he be shipwrecked like the unfortunate Marmontel? I don't wish that, as God's my witness, but I would have liked the book, through some inexplicable spell, to be still in this house. But it hasn't turned up yet, and though I can't say I've looked in every single nook and cranny, I am sure I shan't find it. All my people took part in the treasure hunt except Boumet, who has been out all day. He's often been out lately, but I was careful not to criticize him for it today. I was glad he didn't know we were looking for Mazandarani's book, and I especially didn't want him to learn the present whereabouts of something he wants more than any of us. He's quite capable of dragging us to England after it. I made all the rest of the household promise not to breathe a word to him about it all, threatening dire punishment if they disobeyed. In the afternoon, while we were all slumped in the sitting room, as worn out with disappointment as with effort, Habib said, "Well, there's one Christmas present we shan't be getting." We laughed, and I thought that it really would have been a wonderful present for us all on this Christmas Eve. We were still laughing when there was a knock on the door. It was Conan's servant bringing us the statuette of the two lovers wrapped in a crimson scarf. There was a note with it saying, "After what I learned yesterday, I couldn't keep it under my roof." The pastor wasn't intending to give us a Christmas present, I presume, but that's what it seemed like to us. Nothing could have given me greater pleasure except the 100th name. But I had to hide the statuette straight away and make the others keep quiet about that too. If my nephew saw it, he'd guess everything. How long shall I be able to keep the truth from him? Wouldn't it be better if I just learned to say no to him? I ought to have done that at the beginning, when he wanted me to come on this journey, instead of setting out on this slippery slope with nothing to stop me sliding further and further, except perhaps the buffer of the calendar. In a week's time, the fateful year will have begun. 27 December. A rather sordid incident has just occurred. I am writing it down just to soothe my nerves, and then shall say no more about it. I retired to my room early to do some accounts, and at one point got up to go and see if Boumet was back. He's been out too much lately, and it's worrying, given his mood and that of the city. Not finding him in his room, I thought he might have gone out into the garden to answer some nocturnal call of nature, so I went out too and started to stroll back and forth near the door. The night was mild, amazingly so for December, and you had to strain your ears to hear the waves, near as they were. Suddenly there was a curious sound, like a groan or stifled cry. It came from the direction of the roof, where the maid's room is. I went over, making no noise, and slowly climbed up the ladder. The groans continued. "Who's there?" I asked. No answer, and the sounds stopped. I called out the maid's name. "Nazme? Nazme?" But it was Habib's voice that answered. "It's me, uncle. It's all right. You can go back to bed." Go back to bed? If he'd put it differently, I might have been more sympathetic. I might have turned a blind eye, not having been beyond reproach myself lately. But when he spoke to me like that, as if I were senile or simple-minded, I rushed into the room. It was very small and dark, but I could make out the two shapes and gradually recognize them. You dare tell me to go back to bed? I treated him to a volley of Genoese oaths and gave him a good box on the ear. The ill-mannered lout. As for the maid, I've given her till the morning to pack up her things and go. I've calmed down a bit now, and it strikes me it's my nephew who deserved to be punished rather than the wretched girl. I know how attractive he can be, but one hands out chastisement as one can, not as one would like. I know it's unfair to sack the maid and merely tell my nephew off, but what else can I do? Give the maid a box on the ear and turn my nephew out? Too many things are happening in my house that wouldn't have happened if I'd behaved differently. It pains me to write this down, but perhaps it would hurt me more if I didn't. If I hadn't allowed myself to live as I pleased with a woman who isn't my wife, if I hadn't taken so many liberties with the laws of heaven and of man, my nephew wouldn't have behaved as he did, and I wouldn't have had to hand out punishments. What I've just written is true, but it's also true that if those laws hadn't been so harsh, neither Martha nor I would have needed to get round them. In a world where everything is ruled by chance, why should I be the only one to feel guilty of sin? And why should I be the only one to suffer from remorse? One day I must learn how to act unfairly and simply not worry about it. Monday, 28th December 1665. I went back to see Abdul Latif, the Ottoman official, the scribe in the prison in Smyrna, and I now see I wasn't mistaken when I said he was honest. He's more honest than I could have imagined. I only hope the next few days won't prove me wrong. I took Marta and Hatim with me and a purse full enough to deal with the usual demands. He received me politely in the gloomy office he shares with 3 other officials who were receiving their own clients when I arrived. He signed to me to come close, then told me very quietly that he looked in all the available records but been unable to find out anything about the man we were interested in. I thanked him for his trouble and asked him, with my hand on my purse, how much his researches had cost him. He raised his voice to answer. That'll be 200 aspers. That struck me as a pretty large sum, though neither completely unreasonable nor unexpected. In any case, I had no intention of arguing and just put the coins into his hand. He thanked me in the usual phrases and got up to show me out. That did surprise me. He hadn't bothered to stand when I came in or asked me to sit down, so why should he now be taking me by the arm as if I were an old friend or a benefactor? Once we were outside, he handed back the money I'd just given him, folding my fingers round the coins and saying, "You don't owe me anything. I only consulted a ledger, and that's part of the work I am paid for. Farewell, and may God protect you and help you find what you're looking for." I was dumbstruck. I wondered whether he was genuinely repentant or just playing another Turkish trick to try to get even more money out of me. Should I press him to take something, or merely leave with a word of thanks as he seemed to be suggesting? But Marta and Hatim, who'd been watching all this, starting singing the man's praises as if I'd just witnessed a miracle. "God bless you. You are a good man, the best of all our master the Sultan's servants. May the Almighty watch over you and yours." "Stop," he cried. "Do you want to be the death of me? Be off, and don't let me ever set eyes on you again." So we did go, taking our unspoken questions with us.